Last month, Anthony Waterlow, a schizophrenic who consistently refused medication, was found not guilty of the murder of his father Nick and sister Chloe on the grounds of mental illness. The killing of Nick Waterlow, an art curator of international standing, sent the arts community into deep shock and grief. Anthony Waterlow, now stabilised under psychiatric care in jail, acknowledged in court that had he accepted or been forced to accept treatment for his mental illness, his violent and delusional behaviour would not have so tragically occurred. Surviving members of the Waterlow family have complained that Nick and Chloe were powerless to protect themselves. Mental health advocates say the Waterlow case is the latest tragedy highlighting a system failure. On November the 9th, 2009, Anthony Waterlow, 42, stabbed to death his father Nick Waterlow, 68, and his sister Chloe Houston, 36, when they met for what was supposed to be a reconciling dinner at Chloe's Randwick Semi. A young girl who cannot be named for legal reasons suffered grievous bodily harm at the hands of Anthony Waterlow. Anthony fled the scene and a manhunt was triggered. At the funerals of Nick Waterlow and Chloe Houston, stunned family and friends paid emotional tribute to their lives. With Anthony on the run, CCTV sightings at ATMs were logged, and eventually, through a tip-off from a citizen, police found and arrested Anthony Waterlow on the outskirts of Sydney, where he was taken into custody. At the murder trial of Anthony Waterlow last month, Nick Waterlow's partner, Juliet Darling, was supported by, among others, prominent Australian film director Jane Campion. Ms Campion summed up the family's now consistent concern that Nick and Chloe were powerless to protect themselves from Anthony's sometimes irrational and sometimes violent behaviour.
This case shows that Nick and Chloe tried really, really hard for everything that was available, but they died because Anthony couldn't be scheduled. Not until he'd done something really terrible. It's terrible for him and everybody.
It is a tragedy that shouldn't have happened. We've got a health condition here, schizophrenia, that should have been treated. If it was any other health condition, it would have been treated, but for some reason, for a period of over 2 years, no treatment was provided to Anthony.
Rob Ramjan is Chief Executive of the Schizophrenia Fellowship Association, a mental health advocacy and support NGO. The Mental Health Act allows for scheduling of patients with expert review within 12 hours of detention. Doctors, nurses, police, ambulance officers and magistrates can schedule. There are compulsory community treatment orders. But, Mr Ramjan says, any sign of violent behaviour requires assertive intervention. This did not happen for Anthony Waterlow.
When you have somebody who has mental illness and who has a history of violence, that should send the red flag up, and the assertive follow-up should be absolutely mandatory.
Clearly this is a debilitated mental health system that we have here now, and the people who work in it are functioning often in extremis. The powers that be often don't acknowledge that there are systemic problems, and when events like this occur, individuals are usually scapegoated.
Dr Peter Klug, a psychiatrist with 25 years clinical and forensic experience, is a member of the Mental Health Review Tribunal.
Effectively, there is a clinical failure. But once again, I think there are very many good people working in the mental health system, but they're often placed in impossible situations where there are no beds available, and there is no appropriate environment to care, treat and protect people. So they discharge people when they shouldn't be discharged in order to admit people with psychotic illnesses, or they refuse to admit people or can't admit people because they aren't in a position to discharge others and make beds available.
The Waterlow tragedy is not the only case highlighting a failure of the system to protect. In 2003, there was the case of Kevin Presland, who sued the health department for having failed to treat him properly.
The doctor discharged him, and 6 hours later he stabbed to death Kellyanne Laws, his brother's fiancée.
The Court of Appeal overturned Justice Adams' groundbreaking $300,000 compensation award to Kevin Presland in 2005, but the Presland case still resonates today. Rob Ramjan now says reform is needed following the Presland and Waterlow cases. There needs to be a new right of appeal against decisions denying compulsory treatment for mental illness.
We believe very strongly that there should be a right to appeal against refusal to admit. So if the person is in such a state that they feel they should be staying in a psychiatric hospital for treatment, or if their carers or others who have knowledge of the situation believe that to be the case, there should be a right to appeal against refusal to admit. And I think if we had that, it would resolve a lot of difficulties that currently exist.
Does that exist anywhere in Australia?
I'm not aware of it existing anywhere in this country. We would be at the cutting edge if we did it, but it would address the concerns of many families and, I would also say, of some consumers.
If there was anything of value to come from the Waterlow case, that would be a worthwhile reform.
If this had have existed before the Waterlow case, we may not be talking about this now.
I think that would be a very good reform.
The newly elected O'Farrell government is about to establish this state's first mental health commission under the new Minister for Mental Health, Kevin Humphries.
Well, the Waterlow case as a one-off, I believe, is part of a wider issue, and we're looking at a systemic response.
Minister Humphries has confirmed he will move to amend the Mental Health Act to allow families to appeal against decisions declining compulsory treatment.
The appeals process is something we will take on seriously. Whether that comes through enhancing the role of the Mental Health Tribunal, that's an issue that we will look at. And it's also why, Quentin, we will set up the commission, the Mental Health Commission in New South Wales.
In supporting Juliet Darling, Nick Waterlow's partner, after Anthony's not guilty for reasons of mental illness verdict, Australian actor Rachel Griffiths expressed the anguish felt by all at the trial.
There's nothing to say. There's nothing you can say.
Now, from the Waterlow tragedy, there may be hope for lasting reform to better help protect both the mentally ill and their families. But as always, funding a better system remains the biggest challenge.
Where we're going to come short, Quentin, is money for infrastructure to build these facilities and partner, I believe, with the federal government. There is a big federal debate at the moment on funding mental health, and then, interestingly, the federal government are also alluding to a mental health commission at the federal level, and I would encourage them to keep going down that track. We need probably another $600 to $800 million to build those facilities to make sure that we can provide not only better care but more affordable care. So mental health, like a lot of things at the minute, will revolve around a productive partnership between the state and federal government.